The night was cold, the street lamp flickered, and a boy with torn clothes sat scribbling numbers in a broken notebook, dreaming of a classroom he could never enter. No one noticed him, until a billionaire mother walked in on a moment that would change all their lives forever. This is not just a story about wealth and poverty, but about courage, compassion, and the power of being seen. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't just watch. Join our community. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss another heart-touching journey. Your support helps us share more stories that open eyes and inspire hope. The day broke with a heavy gray sky, the kind of morning that carried more silence than sound. In the corner of the deserted bus shelter, a small figure stirred. Elijah pulled his thin blanket tighter, though it was little more than a rag now, frayed at the edges, its once bright color lost to dirt and time. The concrete floor beneath him was cold, and the faint smell of oil and rust filled the air. He pressed his knees to his chest, trying to stay warm. This bus stop had not seen a working bus in years. For him, though, it was home. 4 rusted poles and a sagging roof that shielded him from the rain. He reached for his backpack, an old torn thing he had salvaged from a trash heap. Inside lay his greatest treasures, a stub of pencil worn down to half its size, 3 sheets of paper with both sides already covered in notes, and a math textbook so tattered its cover was gone. To anyone else, it was garbage. To Elijah, it was gold. He pulled it close, hugging it as though it could give him warmth. The morning air bit at his skin. Hunger gnawed at his belly, sharp and merciless, but he had learned long ago how to quiet it. He distracted himself by opening the textbook, even though the light was weak. He traced a line with his finger, sounding out words under his breath. Multiply, divide, equal. His voice was soft, a whisper to no one but himself. A memory tugged at him. His mother's voice, gentle, tired, whispering in the dark as she pressed her hand to his head. Keep learning, Elijah. Even when I am gone, knowledge will feed you when food cannot. Her face swam before his eyes, her smile thin but full of hope, and he felt the familiar ache in his chest. It had been 2 years, yet her absence was still like a fresh wound. He looked up toward the horizon where the sun was just beginning to rise, spilling faint orange light through the cracks in the shelter's roof. I will keep my promise, Mama, he murmured, his lips trembling. I'll teach myself, and one day I'll teach others. His voice cracked, but determination shone through his small, hollow eyes. Pushing himself up, Elijah stretched his stiff arms and legs. His shorts hung loosely from his bony frame, and his oversized shirt slipped off one shoulder. He brushed the dust from his bare feet and stepped out into the street. The world was already moving, traders setting up stalls, bicycles rattling past, car horns echoing from distant roads. No one looked at him. To them, he was invisible, another shadow among many. But Elijah didn't care. He had a routine. He scanned the ground as he walked, sharp eyes searching for what others threw away. Wrappers with clean backs, crumpled receipts with empty spaces, anything he could write on. At a corner bin, he spotted a notebook with missing pages. He darted forward, snatched it up, and flipped it open. Blank sheets. He smiled, quick and fleeting, and tucked it into his bag like a treasure hunter pocketing diamonds. His stomach growled, loud and painful. He passed by a bakery, inhaling the sweet, intoxicating smell of fresh bread. For a moment, he pressed his face to the glass, watching trays of golden loaves carried out. His hand lifted to the door, then dropped. He knew better. He could not afford it. He turned away, clutching his bag tighter, whispering again as though to steady himself. Food will wait. Lessons cannot. As he walked, his mind churned with numbers. He added the bicycles that rattled past, 2, then 2 more, then another. 5. He subtracted the oranges rolling from a vendor's basket. 10, 1 stolen by a boy running away, 9 left. He practiced everywhere, on everything. The world itself was his chalkboard. The sun rose higher, warming the streets, but Elijah barely noticed. He was already thinking of his next stop, the park near the school, where he could sit on the edge of the fountain and copy problems from his book. It was there on mornings like this that he sometimes saw children in uniforms, their clean shoes tapping on the pavement as they hurried past. He never spoke to them. They belonged to a world he could only imagine, but he watched closely, listening to their chatter about homework, teachers, and tests. Each word was a lesson. This morning, though, something felt different. The air seemed charged, as if it carried more than just the smell of bread and dust. Elijah couldn't explain why, but deep inside he sensed that today would not be like the others. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, pulled his thin shirt tighter, and stepped onto the road. He did not know it yet, but his quiet vow, whispered in the ruins of a bus shelter, was about to collide with another world entirely. The world of glass towers, luxury cars, and guarded mansions. A world where a billionaire's daughter waited, lonely and struggling, about to find her teacher not in the polished halls of her private school, but in the eyes of a homeless boy who refused to stop learning. The city's towers glittered in the morning sun, tall glass giants stretching into the pale blue sky. Far below, cars weaved through the streets, their horns creating a restless symphony that spoke of wealth, speed, and power. On the 15th floor of one of those towers, a large window overlooked it all, and in front of that window stood Evelyn Grace. She was the kind of woman whose name carried weight, billionaire, investor, philanthropist in headlines, but in truth a woman who had built her empire brick by brick with ruthless precision. Her black suit was flawless, her heels sharp against the marble floor. Assistants moved quietly behind her, murmuring updates about meetings, projects, and stock prices. Evelyn nodded occasionally, her face carved into calm detachment, her eyes always scanning the skyline. It was a view she owned, a city she controlled. Yet behind her eyes was something else, a faint emptiness, a silence she never spoke of. "Your daughter's car is ready, ma'am," one assistant said softly. Evelyn nodded, barely glancing away from the glass. She would not be the one to drop Amelia off at school. That had long been delegated to drivers, bodyguards, and tutors. Time to Evelyn was money, and she had little to spare for childish chatter about homework or playground games. Across town, Amelia sat in the back of a gleaming black SUV, her small legs swinging above the polished leather floor. Her crisp uniform was neatly pressed, her hair pulled into perfect braids, yet her eyes were tired. The driver hummed softly as the car rolled forward, but Amelia stared out the tinted window, her face pressed against the glass. She hated mornings. She hated school. Most of all, she hated math. To everyone else, she was the daughter of one of the richest women in the city. To Amelia, she was just a girl drowning in numbers that refused to make sense. Fractions blur. And together, multiplication tables danced mockingly in her head. Teachers frowned, tutors sighed, and even her mother's brief words, "You must do better, Amelia," felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. When the car slowed near the park, Amelia made a decision. It wasn't planned, not fully, but her heart beat faster as she spotted the fountain just beyond the gate, a place she had glimpsed countless times. She tugged at the handle and, before the bodyguard in the front seat noticed, slipped out. Her shoes touched the pavement, and she darted between two hedges, her small figure vanishing into the green before anyone could call out. The air in the park was fresher, the noise of traffic softened, birds chattered in the trees. Amelia's chest lifted, and for the first time in days, she smiled. She skipped toward the fountain, her eyes wide as she spotted something unusual. There, crouched at the edge of the fountain, was a boy. His shirt hung loose on his thin frame, his shorts torn at the hem. His hair was unkempt, his feet bare, but his hands moved with surprising precision as he lined up small bottle caps on the stone. He counted softly, shifting them one by one. Then he drew shapes on the ground with a stub of pencil, pausing to whisper words under his breath. Amelia stopped, frozen. Curiosity tugged at her stronger than fear. She stepped closer, tilting her head. The boy glanced up suddenly, his eyes sharp, cautious. For a moment they stared at each other. Two children from opposite worlds, their gazes meeting like sparks in the air. "What are you doing?" Amelia asked, her voice small but steady. The boy blinked, then looked down at his bottle caps. "Math," he said simply. His voice was quiet but clear, as if he were used to explaining himself. Amelia wrinkled her nose. "Math? With trash?" He gave a small shrug, moving two caps aside. "They're not trash. They're numbers. 1, 2, 3, he pointed as he spoke. You can count them, you can add them, you can make sense of them. Amelia stepped closer, curiosity glowing brighter in her eyes. "I don't like math," she admitted softly, surprising even herself. "It's too hard." The boy tilted his head, studying her. "It's not hard. You just need to see it different." He held up 5 caps in one palm, then added 3 in the other. "See? 5 and 3. Together they make 8. Count with me." Hesitant at first, Amelia raised her small fingers and began counting aloud with him. When she reached 8, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, understanding. Her face lit up. "That's easy," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. The boy smiled faintly, the corners of his lips twitching upward. "Told you. You just needed someone to show you." For a long moment, they sat together on the fountain's edge, moving caps, drawing numbers in the dust. Amelia laughed when she got something right, and the boy, Elijah, watched with quiet pride. Neither of them noticed the SUV circling back, the driver frantic, the bodyguard scanning the park. Neither of them noticed the approaching shadow of a world far larger than bottle caps and chalk marks. For now, there were only two children, side by side, one discovering that math could be magic, the other discovering that teaching could be joy. Neither knew their meeting was the beginning of something that would soon shake the city and Evelyn Grace herself to the core. The park became their quiet secret, a small world tucked between the noise of the city and the watchful eyes of adults who never understood. Each morning, Amelia slipped away from the heavy shadow of her black SUV, her heart racing as she darted past the hedges to where Elijah always waited by the fountain. He never had much, just his torn backpack and the bottle caps he used as counters, but to her, it felt like a treasure chest of wonders. The first time she returned after their chance meeting, Elijah looked at her with cautious surprise. His eyes narrowed as though testing if she was real, or if she would laugh and run away like the other children who sometimes mocked him. But Amelia didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled out a notebook from her shiny school bag and held it out. "Can you show me more?" she asked, her voice both shy and eager. Something shifted in Elijah's expression. His fingers trembled slightly as he touched the cover of her pristine notebook. It was new, smooth, expensive, the kind of thing he could only dream of owning. He didn't take it, but instead nodded and began lining up his bottle caps again. "Math is like a puzzle," he said softly. "You just have to see the pieces." They worked together, hunched over the stone edge of the fountain. Amelia counted out the caps, her small voice rising and falling as she whispered numbers. Elijah corrected her gently when she skipped one, guiding her hands to rearrange the pieces. Slowly, patiently, he explained how subtraction wasn't losing, it was simply giving away. He made her laugh when he described division as sharing bread fairly so no one cries. Day by day, Amelia began to change. At school, her teacher raised her brows in surprise when she answered a problem correctly. At home, she scribbled numbers in the margins of her drawing books, eager to practice before the next secret lesson. Each success filled her with a joy she had never felt sitting in front of private tutors who sighed and tapped their watches. Elijah never sighed, never scolded. He smiled when she got it right, and when she failed, he patiently started again, as though he had all the time in the world. But the friendship wasn't only about numbers. Between lessons, Amelia told Elijah about her world, the tall glass windows of her home, the glittering chandeliers, the quiet echo of empty hallways when her mother worked late. Elijah listened quietly, his eyes reflecting both wonder and sadness. He told her little about himself, but once when she pressed, he admitted, "I don't have a home like that. I sleep where I can." She didn't understand fully, but she knew enough to feel her throat tighten. Sometimes they would pause their lessons to watch pigeons scatter across the park or to laugh at a dog chasing its tail. For those moments, they were simply children, free from expectations, free from burdens too heavy for their small shoulders. Yet even in their laughter, a faint tension lingered. Amelia knew her mother would never approve of her being here. Elijah knew any adult could send him away with a single harsh word. And still, they kept meeting. It became the one part of their day they both looked forward to. Amelia found herself waking earlier, eager to slip from the SUV unnoticed. Elijah, despite the gnawing hunger in his belly, saved his energy for those hours when he could sit beside her and feel, if only briefly, like he mattered. On one particular morning, Amelia solved a problem faster than ever before. She clapped her hands, her laughter ringing across the fountain. Elijah smiled, pride flickering in his eyes. But before either could savor the moment, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Amelia Grace!" The name cracked like a whip. Amelia froze, her hands trembling as she turned toward the voice. Standing at the edge of the park was her driver, flanked by two bodyguards in dark suits. Their eyes locked instantly on Elijah, narrowing with suspicion. Elijah's body tensed. He had seen looks like that before. Eyes that didn't see him as a boy, but as a nuisance, a threat, something to be removed. His instincts screamed at him to run, to vanish before the men could lay hands on him. But Amelia's hand shot out, grabbing his sleeve. Her small fingers clung tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't go," she whispered desperately. "You're my teacher." Elijah's heart pounded in his chest. The footsteps of the bodyguards grew louder, and the shadow of Amelia's world loomed closer with every step. For the first time, their secret was no longer theirs. The collision of two worlds had begun, and neither of them knew what would happen when Amelia's mother found out about the homeless boy teaching her daughter in the park. The black SUV screeched to a stop at the edge of the park, its engine rumbling like a warning. Evelyn Grace stepped out, her heels striking the pavement with sharp precision. Her dark sunglasses hid her eyes, but her posture alone carried authority, the kind that silenced rooms and bent boardrooms to her will. Behind her, the bodyguards stiffened, ready to obey whatever order came. The morning sunlight glinted off the sleek lines of her tailored suit as she advanced, every step measured, unyielding. Amelia's heart lurched. She had never seen her mother here, in this place, outside the cocoon of glass towers and chauffeured cars. The park was her secret world, her sanctuary, and now her mother's shadow loomed over it like a storm. She gripped Elijah's arm tighter, her small fingers trembling. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. He had known this day might come, but the sight of the powerful woman before him still sent fear racing through his chest. He bowed his head, instinctively shrinking into himself as though to make less of a target. Evelyn's gaze swept over the scene, her daughter's pristine white blouse smeared with dust, her expensive notebook lying open on the stone edge of the fountain, and beside her, this boy, thin, ragged, barefooted, clutching a stub of pencil like it was a sword. For a moment, Evelyn froze. The image didn't fit the world she knew. Her daughter, heir to everything she had built, learning not from a tutor with polished credentials, but from a boy who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. What is the meaning of this? Her voice cracked through the air, low and cold. Amelia flinched but didn't let go of Elijah. "Mom, please," she began, her voice trembling. "He's my friend. He's helping me with math." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Elijah, sharp and appraising. He looked up only for a second, meeting her gaze with a quiet steadiness that surprised her. No groveling, no excuses, just calm, like he had nothing left to lose. She hated how that look unsettled her. "You," she said, her tone clipped. "Where are your parents? What are you doing with my daughter?" Elijah's lips parted, but no words came at first. His throat was dry, his mind spinning. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he answered, "I was just teaching her numbers, nothing more." One of the guards stepped forward. "Ma'am, should I remove him?" His hand hovered, ready to grab the boy. Amelia's cry pierced the moment. "No, don't touch him." She threw her arms around Elijah, shielding him as best as her small frame allowed. Her face burned with tears. "He's not dangerous. He's my teacher." Evelyn's breath caught in her chest. The desperation in her daughter's voice, so raw, so unpolished, was unlike anything she had ever heard. For a fleeting second, the iron wall around her heart cracked. She remembered her own childhood, long before the suits and the money, when she had once begged her father to let her keep a stray puppy she'd found on the street. He had said no, coldly, firmly. She had cried just like this. The guard hesitated, waiting for her command. Evelyn's lips pressed into a hard line. Everything inside her screamed to end this immediately, to pull Amelia away and erase this boy from her daughter's life before the tabloids could sniff it out. Yet something stronger held her still. The way Amelia clung to Elijah, the way the boy, though trembling, didn't push her away. The way their eyes mirrored a bond that no hired tutor had ever managed to create. Finally, Evelyn raised a hand. "Leave him," she ordered. The guard froze, then stepped back. Silence fell heavy in the park, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Evelyn turned her gaze back to her daughter. "We'll discuss this at home," she said sharply. Her tone was firm, but the cold edge had softened ever so slightly. She looked at Elijah again, her eyes narrowing as though she were trying to read the story written in the dirt on his clothes and the hunger in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn Grace felt something she could not name. She adjusted her sunglasses and stepped back toward the car. "Come, Amelia." Her voice was calmer now, less commanding, more weighted with something unspoken. Amelia hesitated, her grip on Elijah tightening. She looked from her mother to the boy, torn between two worlds colliding in one breath. "I'll come," she whispered, "but only if you promise not to hurt him." Evelyn paused mid-step. Slowly she turned back, studying her daughter's tear-streaked face. Something deep inside her stirred, a question she wasn't ready to answer. Without a word, she inclined her head ever so slightly. It was not a promise spoken aloud, but it was enough for Amelia. As the SUV door closed with a soft thud and the car pulled away, Elijah stood alone by the fountain, his chest heaving, his heart pounding. He had survived the storm for now. Yet he knew the story was only beginning. The billionaire had seen him, and once she had seen him, nothing would remain the same. The silence in the mansion was unlike any other silence. It was heavy, like velvet curtains drawn across a window, muffling every sound. Amelia sat at the edge of her bed, her hands twisting the hem of her nightdress, her heart still pounding from what had happened that morning in the park. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a spark inside them that refused to dim. She had never stood against her mother before, not like this. Yet when the guards had tried to pull Elijah away, something had broken loose in her, an anger, a desperation she hadn't known she carried. Downstairs, Evelyn Grace paced the length of her study, her heels clicking against polished wood. The city's lights shimmered through the tall windows, but she barely noticed them. She was too busy replaying the scene over and over in her head, her daughter's arms wrapped fiercely around a boy in rags, her daughter's voice trembling yet unyielding, declaring, "He's my teacher." The words had cut deeper than any corporate insult ever had. Evelyn had built a life on rules, on structure, on control, and now a boy from the streets had slipped through that order, dragging her daughter into a world she had spent her whole life shielding her from. It made no sense. It was unacceptable. And yet, when she had looked into the boy's eyes, she had not seen defiance or danger. She had seen something else, something she wasn't ready to name. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Amelia stood in the doorway, clutching her teddy bear, her braids slightly undone. "Mom," she said, her voice small but steady. "We need to talk." Evelyn's brows rose. Amelia rarely asked to talk. She usually listened, nodded, obeyed. Now she walked into the study with the quiet determination of someone far older than her years. She stopped in front of her mother's desk and lifted her chin. "You can't take him away from me," she said. The words hung in the air like thunder. Evelyn stared at her, too stunned to answer at first. "Amelia," she began slowly, "that boy does not belong near you. He's not from our world. You don't know where he's been, what he's done." "He's not bad," Amelia cut in, her small voice rising with sudden force. "He's the only one who makes me understand math. He's the only one who doesn't get angry when I don't get it right. He listens, Mom. He cares." Evelyn's mouth tightened, but Amelia pressed on, her eyes bright with tears. "You're always busy, the tutors don't even like me, and everyone expects me to be perfect. But he doesn't. He makes me feel like I can do it, like I'm smart." For the first time in years, Evelyn felt her chest tighten with guilt. She had given her daughter everything money could buy: schools, tutors, books, clothes, but she had not given her presents. And now here was a boy with nothing, offering her daughter the one thing she had failed to give: patience. Evelyn sat down slowly, her hands clasped together. "Amelia," she said quietly, "you don't understand. Life is complicated. You can't just trust someone because they seem kind." "But I do understand," Amelia insisted, her voice trembling but unbroken. "He's not just someone. He's my friend. If you take him away, you'll break my heart." She swallowed hard, clutching the teddy bear tighter. "And maybe you'll lose me too." The words struck Evelyn like a blow. Her daughter's voice, fragile yet defiant, carried more power than any boardroom speech she had ever given. For a moment, she saw not just her daughter, but herself, years ago, pleading with a father who never listened, learning to hide her softness behind walls of steel. She had vowed never to be weak again, but was this strength? Watching her daughter's heart harden in the same way hers once had? Evelyn exhaled slowly, her voice softer now. "You care about him that much?" Amelia nodded fiercely, tears spilling down her cheeks. "More than anything." The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then Evelyn leaned back, closing her eyes briefly as though weighing an impossible choice. When she opened them again, something in her gaze had shifted. She was no longer the untouchable billionaire, but a mother caught between pride and love. "All right," she said at last, her voice low. "We'll see him again, but only once, and only because you asked." Amelia gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then she rushed forward, throwing her arms around her mother with a cry of relief. Evelyn held her stiffly at first, then almost against her will, wrapped her arms around her daughter. For the first time in years, the embrace didn't feel forced. Yet even as she comforted Amelia, Evelyn's mind was restless. This wasn't over. She had opened a door she could never fully close. That boy had stepped into their lives, and she had no idea what it would cost her. Above them, the city lights burned on, indifferent, but inside the mansion, two worlds had already begun to collide, and nothing would ever be the same again. The dining room glowed with golden light, its crystal chandeliers scattering reflections across polished marble floors. A table stretched wide, dressed in silk runners and lined with silver cutlery that sparkled as though no hand had ever touched it. Elijah sat at the far end, small in the velvet chair, his legs too short to reach the ground. His torn shirt had been replaced with a simple cotton one Evelyn's staff had found for him, though his thin frame made it hang awkwardly. He clutched the edge of the table as though he feared it might vanish beneath him. Amelia, beaming, sat close by, her elbows perched on the table despite her mother's quiet frown. "This is it," she whispered excitedly to Elijah. "Mom let me bring you here for dinner. Isn't it amazing?" Elijah's wide eyes wandered the room, The grand mirrors, the vases of fresh flowers that perfumed the air, the faint hum of a violin playing from hidden speakers. He had never seen such beauty, not even in passing. He wanted to memorize everything, to hold it in his mind for the nights when the bus shelter's roof leaked cold rain onto his face. "It's different," he managed, his voice hushed, almost reverent. Servants moved with quiet grace, placing dishes in front of them. A mound of rice steaming with spices, roasted chicken glistening with golden skin, vegetables arranged like artwork. Elijah's throat tightened. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the fork laid neatly beside his plate. The weight of it alone felt foreign, heavier than the broken spoons he'd scavenged from the street. "Go on," Amelia urged, her face lit with pride, as though she had been the one to bring the feast. He lifted the fork and took a small bite of rice. The flavor burst across his tongue, rich and savory, unlike anything he had ever tasted. His eyes stung unexpectedly, a lump rising in his throat. He swallowed hard, blinking, rapidly. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Amelia, her mother, or some unseen presence that had led him here. Across the table, Evelyn watched. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable, but her eyes never left the boy. Every small movement of his hands, every flicker of awe in his face told a story. She had seen hunger before, on the news, in reports, always distant. But now it was sitting at her table, wearing the shape of a child who had taught her daughter more in a park than her tutors had managed in months. The silence pressed in until Evelyn broke it. "Elijah," she said evenly, "my daughter tells me you've been teaching her math. Is that true?" He looked up quickly, startled by the sound of his name on her lips. "Yes, ma'am," he answered softly, his fingers twisted in his lap beneath the table. "And where did you learn?" she pressed, her voice measured but curious. Elijah hesitated, then lowered his gaze. "From books, old ones. I find them in bins near schools. Sometimes pages are missing, but I try." His voice grew steadier as he went on. "I write on scraps, on the ground with sticks, at night under the street lamps. I keep practicing until I understand." Amelia leaned forward proudly. "See, Mom? He's brilliant. I understand everything when he explains it." Evelyn's chest tightened. Brilliant. That was the word Amelia had never used for the expensive tutor she hired. She leaned her chin on her hand, studying Elijah. "And your parents?" she asked carefully. A shadow crossed his face. He shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on his plate. "My mother. She worked hard. She used to tell me to keep learning, but she got sick." His voice faltered, but he pushed on. "She didn't make it. I don't know my father, so it's just me now." The room seemed to still. Even the violin music felt distant, fading behind the weight of his words. Amelia reached across and squeezed his hand gently, her small fingers warm against his cold skin. Evelyn sat frozen, her carefully built walls cracking in places she had sealed long ago. She saw not just a boy, but a mirror reflecting the choices her empire had overlooked, the lives crushed quietly in the pursuit of more. She wanted to say something, to find words that matched the storm inside her, but nothing came. Instead, she reached for her glass, masking her silence with a sip of water. Amelia's chatter filled the space once more, recounting how Elijah had shown her how to share bread fairly when learning division, how he never got angry, how he believed she could be smart. Evelyn listened, her gaze drifting back to Elijah. The boy ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it might be the last. For the first time in years, Evelyn Grace felt the sharp sting of guilt mixed with something else she could hardly name: admiration, respect, and a growing realization that this dinner was not the end of a strange encounter, but the beginning of something that might unravel the life she thought she had under control. When Elijah finally lifted his head and whispered, "Thank you for letting me sit here," Evelyn felt her throat close. She only nodded, afraid that if she spoke, her voice might betray the storm she was no longer sure she wanted to hide. Night had settled over the mansion, a soft hush falling across its polished corridors. The city beyond the gates glittered with restless lights, but here, inside, silence held court. Evelyn Grace sat alone in her private study, the glow from a single lamp casting long shadows across the bookshelves that lined the walls. In front of her, a glass of untouched wine stood next to a folder of contracts she had no interest in reading. Her thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on the boy who had sat at her table only hours before. She could still see him, hunched slightly in the velvet chair, his eyes wide at the sight of crystal glasses and silver forks. She could still hear his quiet voice when he spoke of his mother, of nights under street lamps, of pages scavenged from the trash. Each word had been like a chisel tapping at the stone she had built around her life. And then Amelia's voice, bright, insistent, had carried those words further, declaring him brilliant, declaring him more than any tutor had ever been. Evelyn had listened, but the weight of something unspoken lingered in her chest, pressing harder with every passing hour. A folder of old employee records lay half open on her desk, forgotten until now. She pulled it closer, flipping through until a name caught her eye. Ruth Okiki, the boy's mother. She remembered vaguely a cleaner who had worked in one of her company's towers, a woman who had asked for extra hours when the layoffs came. Evelyn's own signature was there, cold ink on a termination notice that had sent Ruth away without severance, without support. She stared at it, her hand tightening on the page. It came back to her in fragments, the board insisting on cuts, her own decision to comply without question, to protect profit margins. She hadn't thought of the cleaner again, until tonight. Now her decision had a face, a boy's face, Elijah's. The door creaked. Softly, and Amelia padded in, her small figure wrapped in a blanket, her teddy bear dragging by her side. "You're still awake," she said sleepily, rubbing her eyes. Evelyn closed the folder quickly, pushing it aside. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. Amelia climbed onto the armchair opposite, curling up with practiced ease. "I was thinking about Elijah," she said, her voice faint but certain. "He looked so happy eating dinner, like it was the best day of his life." She smiled faintly, then looked at her mother with wide eyes. "Can we help him, Mom? Really help him?" Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to answer, to offer a promise, but the weight of her own guilt pressed her tongue to silence. Amelia, sensing her hesitation, leaned forward. "You always say we're supposed to use our money to do good things. What could be better than this?" The innocence in her daughter's voice cut deeper than any accusation. Evelyn leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. She remembered her own childhood, the long hours she had spent hungry, waiting for her father to come home with money that never stretched far enough. She had promised herself she would never be powerless again. Yet here was a boy proving power meant nothing if it didn't lift others with it. The room grew heavy with silence. Amelia clutched her teddy bear tighter, her eyes shining. "If we don't help him," she whispered, "then we're no better than the people who hurt him." Evelyn's heart lurched. The words were too sharp, too true. She closed her eyes and saw Ruth Okiki again, standing in a hallway, pleading for more hours. She saw herself walking past, heels clicking on marble, not even stopping to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Amelia had ever heard it. "He deserves more than scraps of kindness. He deserves justice." Amelia tilted her head, not fully understanding, but she caught the change in her mother's tone. Evelyn reached across the desk, resting her hand over her daughter's. "We'll help him," she said firmly, almost to herself as much as to Amelia. "But not just with food and clothes. We'll find a way to make things right." The words felt like a vow, heavy and binding. Evelyn's eyes returned to the folder on her desk, the signature that had sealed Ruth's fate. She knew what she had to do. Outside, the city's lights blinked like watchful stars. Inside the mansion, a mother and daughter sat in silence, unaware that the choice Evelyn was about to make would shake her empire, rattle her reputation, and force her to confront the ghosts she had long tried to bury. For the first time in years, Evelyn Grace felt afraid. Not of failure, not of rivals, but of the truth she would have to face in the eyes of the world. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the boy at the fountain had already begun to change everything. Morning sunlight spilled into the breakfast hall, painting the long dining table in warm gold. The staff moved quietly, laying out plates of fruit and bread, but the air was far from calm. Evelyn Grace sat at the head of the table, her coffee untouched, her phone buzzing with alerts she ignored. Amelia bounced in her chair, her eyes bright with the stubborn excitement of a child who knew she had won a small battle. Elijah sat between them, his hands folded neatly in his lap, unsure of where to look. He had never seen ceilings so high or chandeliers so dazzling, and yet every glance reminded him that he did not belong here. The night before had left Evelyn restless. Sleep had evaded her, chased away by the image of Ruth Okiki's name stamped on that termination notice, by her daughter's trembling voice insisting they help the boy. Now, as she sat in the golden light, watching Elijah nibble cautiously at a piece of bread, she knew her world was shifting beneath her feet. "Eat," she urged quietly, her tone less commanding than usual, almost gentle. "There's plenty." Elijah looked up, startled by the softness in her voice. He nodded, taking a larger bite, though the movement of his jaw betrayed how unfamiliar he was with eating at leisure. Amelia leaned toward him, whispering, "See? I told you Mom wants you here." But even Amelia could sense something unspoken in the room. Evelyn's eyes carried questions, heavy ones. She was studying Elijah as if every answer she needed was hidden in his small frame. Finally, she set her cup down and folded her hands. "Elijah," she said, her voice steady but low, "if I asked you what you want most in life, what would you say?" The boy blinked, his throat tightening. No one had asked him that before. Not truly. He lowered his gaze, fingers curling against his knees. "To learn," he whispered. "To go to school. To become something. Maybe. A teacher. Or a doctor." His voice faltered as if the dream itself was too fragile to speak aloud. "So no child has to sit outside a window the way I do." Evelyn's chest clenched. She had expected something simple, a request for food or shelter. Instead, she heard conviction, purpose. She thought of the fortune she had built, the schools she had funded in her name for prestige more than passion. And here sat a boy whose desire burned brighter than any glossy report. Before she could respond, Amelia burst in with her usual fervor. "Then let's make him a student here, Mom. He can come to my school. We can sit together in class." Her voice bubbled with hope, as though the answer were as simple as signing a form. Evelyn leaned back, her face unreadable, but her mind raced. It was not simple. There were rules, reputations, the board of directors who already whispered about her softer stances in recent months. A homeless boy in her daughter's elite academy would be scandalous. It would be seen as weakness, as recklessness. Yet when she looked at Amelia's pleading eyes and Elijah's quiet, waiting expression, she realized weakness would be in doing nothing. "I can't promise that yet," she said carefully, each word weighed. "But I can promise this. You will not go back to the street tonight." Elijah's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "You mean, you'll stay here, in this house?" Evelyn said firmly, though the decision tasted both terrifying and inevitable. "At least until I figure out the rest." Amelia squealed with delight, clapping her hands, but Elijah sat frozen, overwhelmed. The walls around him seemed to tilt, the marble floor beneath his bare feet suddenly unsteady. He had dreamed of a desk, a uniform, a lamp by which to read, but never of this, being welcomed into a mansion, into a family. Later that day, whispers began to ripple. A photograph of Evelyn stepping out of her SUV with Elijah by her side spread through social media. The boy's ragged past was already being dissected, speculated on, judged by strangers who had never once seen his hunger or his determination. The board members called her, their voices sharp with concern. "This will ruin your image," one warned. "You cannot attach yourself to a child like that." Evelyn listened, her face calm, her grip on the phone tightening. She ended the call without reply, walking to the balcony where Elijah and Amelia were leaning against the railing, watching birds swoop over the garden. The boy's laughter rang out, soft, hesitant at first, then full, free. For a moment, Evelyn simply watched, her heart torn between fear of losing everything she had built and the undeniable truth that had settled deep within her. The empire she had built on control and distance suddenly seemed small compared to this. 2 children, side by side, one teaching, one learning, both reminding her of the humanity she had buried long ago. The decision she had made at the breakfast table was only the beginning. She knew storms were coming, scandal, opposition, perhaps even betrayal, but she also knew there was no turning back. The boy she had once seen as an intruder was now entwined with her family's future. And somewhere in the quiet corners of her heart, Evelyn Grace felt the stirrings of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years: hope. The storm came faster than Evelyn expected. By the end of the week, her face was plastered across news channels, her name climbing social media trends with headlines sharp as knives. Billionaire Evelyn Grace brings street boy into mansion. Irresponsible parenting or hidden charity stunt. Talk show hosts debated her motives, shareholders whispered about recklessness, and members of her board demanded explanations in urgent late-night calls. The polished empire she had built on reputation and power suddenly trembled under scrutiny. In the mansion, the atmosphere was no calmer. The staff spoke in hushed tones, some uneasy at the boy's presence, others quietly sympathetic. Elijah noticed every glance, every half-hidden frown. He was used to being invisible, but here, in these glittering halls, he felt exposed. Each time a servant passed by, his shoulders tightened. He ate slowly at meals, always careful to leave food on the plate, terrified that taking too much might make him appear greedy. One evening, Evelyn returned from a grueling board meeting. Her suit was immaculate, but her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting all day. As she stepped into the sitting room, she found Elijah curled in an armchair, his small figure dwarfed by the cushions. He looked up, startled, and immediately started to rise. "You don't have to stand," she said quietly, surprising even herself with the gentleness in her tone. She sank into the chair across from him, removing her heels with a sigh. The silence stretched between them until Elijah spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I can leave if it makes things easier for you." Evelyn's head lifted sharply. "What did you say?" "I don't want people to hate you because of me," he murmured, his hands twisting together in his lap. "I've lived on the street before. I know how to survive. I'll find another lamp, another plan. See to learn. I don't want to ruin your life." The words hit her like a blade. She saw his small, tired face lit by the flicker of street lamps, hunched over scraps of paper. She imagined him retreating into the cold, carrying his notebook like a shield against hunger. Something in her chest cracked open. "You think you're ruining my life?" she asked, her voice trembling with an emotion she rarely allowed herself. "Elijah, you are the only one reminding me what life is supposed to mean." He stared at her wide-eyed, unsure if he had heard correctly. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice firm now. "My world is full of people who smile to my face and sharpen their knives behind my back. But you," she paused, shaking her head, "you have given my daughter joy I haven't seen in years. You've given me something money never could, truth." For a long moment, Elijah couldn't answer. His throat tightened and tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. He quickly rubbed them away, embarrassed. Amelia, who had been listening from the staircase, ran down and threw her arms around him. "You're not going anywhere," she declared fiercely. "If Mom doesn't want you, then I do." Evelyn felt her chest ache at the sight of her daughter clutching the boy as though he were family. Slowly she rose, placing her hand on both their shoulders. "Enough," she said softly. "No one is leaving. Not tonight. Not ever. Do you understand?" But even as she said it, she knew the battle outside these walls was only growing. Investors were pulling back, the press was circling, and her once loyal allies were whispering betrayal. She had chosen to stand with this boy, and the cost would be high. Still, as she looked at Elijah's trembling smile and Amelia's determined face, Evelyn Grace felt no regret. For the first time in decades, she was no longer fighting to protect an empire. She was fighting for something infinitely more fragile and infinitely more worth saving. The day of reckoning arrived on a crisp autumn morning when the city's skyline shimmered beneath a pale sun. Evelyn Grace stood before the towering glass headquarters of her company, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. Behind those doors waited the board, journalists and critics eager to tear her apart. The scandal of the homeless boys she had taken in had grown into a tidal wave. Pundits questioned her sanity, rivals whispered of her downfall, and even allies urged her to distance herself from Elijah before everything collapsed. But Evelyn had made her choice. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, each second heavy with consequence. Her heels clicked against marble as she walked into the boardroom, and all eyes snapped toward her. Men in tailored suits shifted uncomfortably, papers shuffled, the tension thick enough to choke. At the head of the table, the chairman leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Evelyn, the shareholders are restless. They don't understand why you've risked the company's image for this boy." For a moment, silence reigned. Evelyn set her bag down and straightened her posture. Then, instead of answering, she reached for the remote and switched on the large screen at the far end of the room. The screen flickered to life with a live feed, not of financial reports or market graphs, but of Elijah. He was standing in the small study Evelyn had prepared for him, wearing a freshly pressed shirt and holding one of his tattered notebooks. His voice, steady but raw with sincerity, filled the room. "My name is Elijah. I lived on the streets for months after my mother died because she couldn't afford treatment for a sickness that could have been cured. I wanted nothing more than to learn. I used to stand outside classrooms and write down lessons through the window. I never thought I would ever be seen, but Mrs. Grace and her daughter saw me. They gave me a desk, books, and hope. If that makes her weak, then I think the world needs more weakness like that." The room was still, the words cut sharper than any prepared speech Evelyn could have delivered. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, another cleared his throat, but no one dared to interrupt. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice clear, resonant, each word deliberate. "You call this reckless," she said, her gaze sweeping across them. "But what is truly reckless is building an empire while children like Elijah rot in shadows. What is reckless is funding schools in my name for the sake of prestige, while a boy with more hunger to learn than any of us is left behind. You want to know why I chose him? Because he reminds me of what all this was supposed to be for, not profit, not reputation, humanity." Her words echoed through the boardroom like a verdict. The chairman's mouth opened, but no sound came. For once, even the sharpest critics were silenced. Hours later, when Evelyn returned home, Amelia and Elijah were waiting in the garden. The girl's arms flew around her waist, while Elijah stood quietly, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and awe. She knelt down, pulling them both close, and whispered, "No matter what the world says, we stand together, always." The following week, the headlines shifted. What had been painted as scandal turned into admiration. Billionaire stands firm for homeless boy. Grace Foundation announces new scholarship program. Evelyn had made her decision public. She would not only adopt Elijah, but also launch a program in his mother's name, dedicated to funding education for children like him. The final reveal stunned everyone. Elijah walked through the gates of St. Peter's School, not as an intruder or a shadow at the window, but as a student in a crisp new uniform, his head held high. And beside him, Amelia gripped his hand, her face alight with pride. Evelyn watched from a distance, her chest tight with emotion. For years, she had measured success in numbers, deals, and towering glass buildings. But now, as she saw Elijah step into the classroom with his bag slung across his shoulder, she realized her greatest legacy was not the empire she built, but the boy she had chosen to save. And in that moment, everyone who had doubted her, everyone who had whispered of weakness, finally understood. What she had done was not weakness at all. It was strength, the kind that left the world speechless.